Is the Silicon Valley culture the same as it used to be? With recent big tech leaders now getting into the political space, is technology now a route towards government power? We're going to talk about these issues and more on this episode of Today in Tech. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Joining me on the show today is Rob Lalka. He is the Albert R. LePage Professor in Business at Tulane University and Executive Director of the LePage Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Oh, that's a really long title. And Rob is also the author of The Venture Alchemists, which demystifies how tech entrepreneurs built empires that made trillions of dollars. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Rob, I got through about 75% of the book, so that's actually good for me. So I really enjoyed the book. And again,
you must have loved it. 75%. It's a big book. So
well,
way to go.
12% of it is all your notes at the end. So
it's true.
And so I wanted to ask you about the big themes of the book, because I could explain it, but I think I've got the author on the show, so why not have you do it? How did you come to this realization that the tech world was this mixture of heroes and scoundrels, as you guys call them? And because again, this is not the first book that's been written about a lot of these people. You cover Mark Zuckerberg, you cover Larry Page, right, and Sergey from Google. There's a whole bunch of people that you cover. But just tell me about the origins of the book and how you decided to write this.
Yeah. So what's different about this book? There's a lot of ink that has been spilled on all of the people that are in there. What's different about this book is not that I went and interviewed all of them and got some inside scoop, or that I had some key insights into like the way that their psychology was working or their thinking, or even that I had that fresh of a take on sort of what they had done and who they were. It was that I took a step back and sort of reflected on the last 2 decades and said, we kind of worship these people culturally as heroes.
Right.
And then all of a sudden their fall from grace was super quick. Like now we're villainizing them. And so we all know that we're just human. They're just human. We are flawed. They are flawed. Like this is basic understanding of who we are as people. What if I take a approach like that to try and understand what decisions were they making? What were they inspired by? What were they tweeting? What were they blogging about? And kind of look at it as a fresh take of them as human beings making choices, and not just one or two of them, but as many of them as I could fit into a book without going too far over the page limit, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I tried to do.
And do you cover? I think it's like is it the same 9 people that you're covering? And because I like you talk about there's pictures of all of these people at different stages of their life, and is it the same 9? Because I think it was in like a Brady Bunch type of format in the book. Is it the same 9 people?
Yeah, they're
Okay.
sort of main characters and supporting actors is the way I would think about it. And I actually do structure it like a 3-act play. And so it begins like you would always think about. So in Shakespeare, the 3-act play is where you begin with sort of the setup, then you have the conflict, then you have some resolve, right? And so the 3 acts for me are Silicon. It's thinking about how did they create these amazingly powerful, even ubiquitous tools and frankly, just sort of business, very powerful business ideas that then went so global and really in an unprecedented kind of way. Like these companies grew so fast, and it's because of technology, it's because of silicon, right? And then gold, how much money that made them and how they made that money. I especially get into the value of data and how much that data was worth in the ways that they used it. And then the 3rd act is power. And that 3rd act really does focus on not only how did they influence elections, things like Uber with Prop 22 in California, and some of the other machinations that we've seen with people like Peter Thiel in 2016, Keith Rabois, and then others as they moved more into politics in more recent years, but especially their sort of assertion of that power, which we now do see in someone like a J.D. Vance.
Okay, and I want to get to the Vance and the political stuff in a second, but I also wanted to ask you about some of the earlier things. Was there a point where a lot of these Silicon Valley quote unquote heroes did turn into scoundrels? Like, I'm sure that if we brought up individual people, there's probably a point where you can say this is when things started to change, especially with Facebook. And although I think in your Facebook Mark Zuckerberg example, like I always got the feeling that Zuckerberg was always a villain. Like I don't think and I think he just got lucky with the whole Social Network movie, in his case of him being the hero of his own story. But we can argue that, I guess, back and forth. But was there a point where you started to see this with a lot of the people that you're profiling, or was it an individual thing, or was it just money at some point? Like, the whole Google thing with Don't Be Evil all of a sudden became like, well, we're getting a lot of money if we do advertising and we can make a lot of money this way. And so money entered the equation, and that's when things started to turn.
Yeah. So each of these stories is really complicated because we're human beings. And we're complex people, right? And like these leaders who we've previously lionized were always complex. They were always making interesting, complex choices. And if you go back, as I do, and that's the reason why there's so many citations, use the internet Wayback Machine and see what they were tweeting, see what they were blogging.
Yeah.
You gain an understanding in a particular time and place of what they were saying and doing, and you understand a little bit more about why they were doing that. And so that's definitely the approach that I've taken is sort of, I try and really document it, and I'm not judging any of it. I'm just trying to shed light, trying to understand what was being said at the time and what were they thinking. I guess the best example of that is Sergey and Larry, because their original Stanford thesis, they said it would be insidious business if they ran ads next to answers.
Right.
Insidious business. It was a moral judgment that they were making in their thesis about how companies like Yahoo were running banner ads and were running ads on the side and running content that you couldn't discern ads from answers. And that was something they called insidious because it was basically moving away from the truth. Now, why did they care about that? Well, it's because they were professors' kids. They cared about search for truth, just like universities like the one I teach at, or Harvard is Veritas, Yale is Lux at Veritas. Like these places are supposed to be about the search for truth. That's who their dads were, right? Is that they were professors who knew that peer review and citation counts was the way that you were able to at least get close enough to who was the most influential and who was at least creating something that was close enough to the truth, right? Well, that's the reason why early on with Google, Backrub originally, and then Google, it was, well, what we were clicking on was determining what was most popular and making that the most important thing on the internet because it was a search for truth. What's interesting is that if you look at it now, they very much have moved towards making it completely impossible to tell what would be original content versus what would be advertisements.
Right.
The example I use in the book is if I go to a new city, let's say I go to Kansas City, instead of wanting barbecue for one evening, I want really good Mexican food, right? And I go on to look up Mexican food. I don't know whether that Mexican food that's popping up is an ad or an answer to me, right? And even if it's no longer, even if it looks like an answer, even if it doesn't say promoted on there, the reason it might be popping up is because a lot of people clicked on it because it was promoted in the past and it's not being now. And why was it being promoted in the past? Well, it might be because they were, 3-for-1 margaritas, has nothing to do with the quality of the Mexican food. And what's that end up with? Well, really bad Mexican food and a bad hangover, right? And so if you're thinking about ads and answers, it actually is, the end result is not what they intended to create in that example that I give you.
Yeah.
So those are the ways that I approach these stories in the book, is I try and just shed light on where have we ended up versus what was intended, and what were the decisions that were made, and why were those decisions that were made.
I'm really proud of you for not making a moral judgment, but I feel like you could if you wanted to. Like you could say, like, look, money corrupted everybody, but you don't. So I guess I think that it's cool that you take this stand.
Look, I trust the reader, and I want the reader to make every possible judgment that he or she wants to make as they're using these tools. Because here's the other thing. You can't blame these technologists if you don't like what they did, because you didn't start something different that went and did what they did. And you may continue to use these tools even if you have some moral objections to Facebook trying to put out tools, several years ago that were they wanted our kids to be using when they were on the playground. Like, these are the types of things that, yes, if you're going to have a moral objection, you can look at some of these things in terms of the health consequences, in terms of the ways that, especially children are exploited. And I don't like it, but that for me is something that when I say I don't like it, I'm not saying Rob Locke doesn't like it. I'm saying, let's look at what the Surgeon General is saying about this and try and understand what the consequences are.
Right. It does feel like for a lot of these companies, we have gotten to the point where they have, I don't know if they've gone too far or if we've gone too far as humans in using it. And again, there's always that whole duct tape, dark side, light side equation joke that you've heard of, there's still a lot about technology that I like. I still do use Facebook, and I posted a photo of my Thanksgiving, for example, my family for Thanksgiving. And I know I shouldn't be posting it on Facebook, because of all of the data that it's capturing, and but I can't quit this thing cold turkey. And then everybody that reacted to it, again, I got a ton of engagements for this one photo. And yeah, I think that my friends should see photos of me being happy at Thanksgiving. It's, so I don't know. I mean, I've got that love-hate relationship as well, but I also know what I don't like. And I don't like look at watching my kids just scroll on their phones through their Instagram feed and TikTok feeds and then not pay attention to us at dinner, for example, like that needs to change. And I think they recognize it as well. So I think we've got this mix of good and bad.
And I think that the two things I'd say about that is, one, many of the things that we are worried about now and having conversations about as adults who now have kids, that this is a multi-generational sort of impact of these technologies, right? Like, we were warned, and we were sometimes the ones doing the warning early on. And so I went back through the college newspapers as Facebook hit every campus, tried to look at what were people saying then. And then to give the book away, at the end, I go back and interview the people 20 years later and say, you said this in 2005. How do you feel now?
Yeah.
Right? And so it's really illuminating to me the ways that, some of the early warnings were actually it foretold a lot of some of the things that are now being discussed, for instance, in the halls of Congress.
Right.
So that's the first thing, is that, like, 20 years ago, people were having this conversation. Maybe they just weren't listened to, or maybe the technologies were so quick and so unregulated. And so, frankly, maybe even not unregulated, maybe just not even not understood by the people who were using it and the longer term consequences. But there were people who had warnings. So that'd be the first thing I'd say about that. The other is, we were all making choices. We've been making choices for 20 years on this stuff.
Right.
So if we want to make different choices, we can make different choices. But that's going to be up to individuals to make those choices. Like, I believe in corporate responsibility for sure, but I'm also someone who's very big on individual responsibility. And I think unless people are willing to make those individual choices, I doubt the world's going to change that quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, and again, Facebook has been around for 20 years now, 20 plus maybe, or 20, it's around that 20-year time frame. I didn't have kids at that point. Right. So when Facebook came around, I wasn't thinking about, 20 years in the future, how my kids were going to be using this, and teenagers. And even I don't even think I had a cell phone at that point. Or if I did, it was that big brick thing that had no apps on it at all. And so, that evolved as well with the technology, and there's good and bad for phones, just as much as social media.
That's right. And it will continue to evolve. That's the key.
Yeah.
But the choices you're making about what you post about your kids and their pictures and all of that will have implications for their lives. And the data that is out there about them will have implications for their lives in ways that, as a parent or even just as a member of society, like, we all need to be thoughtful about this. Because if we're not, then oftentimes what it does drive towards is the sort of, let me feed the dopamine machine, which is not the best version of ourselves.
Right. Right. All right. So I want to switch talk about some of the political stuff. Great stuff about J.D. Vance and his kind of rise to where he was from. We wrote the book. What was that? Hillbilly Elegy, right?
That's it.
And and then he went to a venture capital firm, and I was going to interview you right before Trump named Vance as vice president. And I was like, I didn't want to get into the political part of it from a Democrat Republican side of things. But now that the election is over, I'm also seeing that, like, because there's other people that you talk about. You talk about Vivek Ramaswamy. Yep. And then Elon Musk as well. I mean, you might as well just throw him into the mix. Did this surprise you? And even with Peter Thiel, working behind the scenes, I think he's more of a behind the scenes impact than out front like J.D. Vance is. Did this surprise you at all to see a lot of these people as they acquired this wealth, that then they would move towards acquiring power via the government? Is because that never happened with Steve Jobs, Larry Ellison, Bill Gates. I mean, I guess you could say Bill Gates in some ways. Mm-hmm. He went into the philanthropy route rather than the government power route. But is that a new thing that you're seeing with this now generation?
So I finished writing the book in May, June. I mean, it was June of, so it's Father's Day of 2023.
Okay.
When I finished it up and finished the acknowledgments and submitted it. I made a few changes after that, but like the main character of the book and all the content was there by that point. Published on May 14th of 2024 of this year. So all before Vance was he was a U.S. senator at that point.
Right.
And a pretty early in his tenure junior senator from the state of Ohio. And so certainly was not at the top of anyone's betting list for who would be the vice president. And so I will say that one of the things I did get right here is that I was tracking his career and more the relationships and the way that people were working with him and for him in order to encourage his rise to power. And let's be clear, like this is for his generation, this is the fastest rise to power of anyone of his generation.
Yeah.
Barack Obama rose to power after a couple of years in the Senate and became the president. Donald Trump never held public office and became the president. But other than those two, really in modern political history, J.D. Vance is the fastest to power. And so I think it's important for us to understand not only how he did that, but what was going on with that.
Mm-hmm.
And a big answer to that is that powerful people encouraged him and supported him, and it's money. It's money. And so when we look at what happens in those chapters, and so especially chapters 12, 13, 14, 15, you look at Peter Thiel gave $1.25 million to support Trump in 2016. And he was excoriated for it. He was called every name in the book.
Yep.
Everyone in Silicon Valley said they would never invest in anything that he ever did again. We got a lot of that feedback, and not just from the sort of liberal blogosphere that didn't like Trump. You also saw that from people like Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos said at the time that the thing about Peter is that he's a contrarian, and contrarians are usually wrong. I mean, that's the type of
Jeff. Wait, but isn't that what Jeff Bezos was called like early on in his career too?
But in this case, It was very much everyone was betting against Trump because this is a long shot bet. And Thiel was one of the top 10 donors to Trump with just 1.25 million.
Right.
So keep that number in mind, 1.25 million.
Okay.
Now it's an odd number. Like, why 1.25? Why not 1? Why not 2? It's Peter Thiel. He could give as much as he really wants to.
Mm-hmm.
Why 1.25 million? And so I sort of thought that through, and I don't know if this is the reason or not, but it's interesting. He also gave that exact same amount right around the same time to Patry Friedman, Milton Friedman's grandson, to do seasteading, which is to build islands, Burning Man on boats, right? To build islands in the ungoverned waters, to build a new country where you could have basically an anarcho-capitalist, libertarian style utopia.
Okay.
Right? So he's making bets is one thing you can at least say. He's making these $1.25 million bets. That's 2016. Let's fast forward to 2022. Vance is running for U.S. Senate. Thiel gives $15 million. So we've gone from $1.25 million to $15 million. Okay. Vance is fifth in a Republican primary field of 5.
Wow.
He's last.
Okay.
He is having trouble with voters because everyone says he's a never Trumper, and many of them were supporting Trump, right? They all knew the things that people, ran many ads against J.D. Vance to try and bury his political career about the things he had said about now President Trump. And so
those were even brought up in this campaign too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it was brought up in his Senate campaign, brought up in the presidential campaign. And these things were the most out there sort of words against President Trump. It's not just he was a never Trumper, he was comparing the man to Hitler.
Right.
Right. And yet, with the help of the $15 million, and Vance didn't raise all that much compared to his opponent because he didn't need to. He had the money through the super PAC. Vance was able to become, U.S. Senator. He went from 5th to 1st in the primary and then won in the general election. Now, here's what's interesting too, and your listeners will really understand this one in a way that many people who are following this work would not. They used a Medium site to post all of the stuff that you would usually use for a political campaign on a Medium site that was publicly available. That's how they got around the idea that the PAC wasn't cooperating with the campaign, because the campaign would check the Medium site. No one else knew the Medium site was out on the internet. When you search for JD Vance, all you got was Hillbilly Elegy about the movie and the book. You never could have found the Medium site buried in Google results.
Okay.
It was there, but because it was out in a public site, they could say, well, this is available if anyone wants to find it. And so it was a, brilliant move, however you want to look at it. That is brilliant for them to be able to then put everything they need in terms of opposition research and strategy and polling and everything you would need for a multi-million-dollar political campaign, which came directly from the super PAC, not from the campaign itself.
Okay.
And so those types of moves were a way of using technology really creatively. And some people would judge that. I'm not going to. I'm just going to say that it happened. Right? Okay. And then that's how they were able to, Vance became U.S. Senator, right? And he won very convincingly. Now, Blake Masters, who was also one of Peter Thiel's acolytes, someone who Thiel supported, did not win his Senate race. And then he also lost a congressional race. So the story is not just that this was Thiel's money and that was that alone that caused this to happen.
Right.
But we could all say that J.D. Vance would not be a U.S. Senator without Thiel's support in that election.
Okay.
That was $15 million, right? This most recent election cycle, Elon Musk gave over $200 million to Donald Trump.
Wow.
$200 million.
So, you're definitely seeing the money go up.
So this is exponential growth. 1.25 million to 15 million to 200 million. That's exponential growth. And so that is, I think, important for all of us to look at, and we think of who is getting involved in politics and why. And the fact that J.D. Vance is someone who had a very different view of the man who will be sitting in the Oval Office just a couple of years ago, and is now literally his greatest proponent and will be his vice president.
So the cynic in me would say it's because of the money. And another person could say, well, maybe he had a change of thought, or he saw how Trump performed in the 4 years when he was president the first time. You could make an argument for either of those, right?
Yeah, you can make an argument for both and still probably be right. I mean, one thing I would say is that Vance is someone who has been very malleable in some pretty phenomenal ways. I mean, his name was J.D. Hamill after he was 30 years old. And he's someone who has changed positions fairly frequently. And I think that that's something that, we are entering a new era. And what I would say is that technology has a key role in playing, in influencing that in terms of how culture is shifting, both in terms of how much we change our identities online and how much our digital identities can shapeshift. I think that's a really interesting thing to think about.
Yeah.
And how we hate the fact that if we say something as a joke that gets misunderstood on the internet, it lives forever, and you could be canceled for that decades from now.
Yeah.
I think those cultural phenomena are very much at play in both the way that we are more forgiving towards people who are changing so quickly, and also the way that there's a sort of desire that we actually pursue a world like that. Now, the question for your listeners is, what happens when we then have the metaverse where you can shapeshift entirely? Where does identity belong? Like, where do you actually have identity, right? And not just identity, but identifying. Because in Hillbilly Elegy, J.D. Vance, who is from north of Cincinnati, Ohio,
right,
where I say there are no hills, much less hillbillies, right? Like no hills, much less hillbillies. There are no hills north of Cincinnati. J.D. Vance in Hillbilly Elegy says, my name is J.D. Vance. That's the beginning of the book. His name was not J.D. Vance a couple years earlier.
Right.
So he says that in the book. And then he says, I identify with the people from Appalachia. I identify. That's a really interesting choice of words.
And this was all before, so now imagine this in a metaverse world where you're not even tied to a physical location or a physical identity, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. I want to get, that's a completely other episode. We'll probably have to dig deeper into that at some point.
I'd love to. Because I think it's really interesting because we're all making choices about what we want to say still matters and what we don't care about anymore. And I think we're starting to see it playing out even in our leaders in a way that will be very interesting to see the way it goes 10 years from now.
We just have to make the metaverse more interesting for people, I think, than it currently is.
What's
It's
gonna
not
happen when that's the next frontier, though, right? Where's the money to be made? It's in all these digital assets, right?
well, yeah, but like no one wants to buy any additional headgear and all this other stuff that's bogging down the technology,
That's true.
and then they all saw what Zuckerberg did with the Horizons thing, and there was a big deal about legs and
Yeah, right.
and using it for work. Like the last thing I want to do at work is put a headset on so I could talk to my neighbor who's like across the hall with a headset on. Anyway, that's going in another rabbit hole. I want to still ask about the political aspirations part of it. Now you did talk about Thiel and the funding he gave for JD Vance. Does this also explain then Vivek and Elon Musk and maybe some of these other leaders that are thinking about, okay, well, I've made my money here in Silicon Valley, so I want more money by doing this political stuff, or is there something else that you're seeing? Have is this going to be a pathway for a lot of people? Again, because you do have this generational split between, the Bezoses of the world. I don't know where to put Zuckerberg. He's kind of in between. But the Bill Gates, the Steve Jobs, all of those people, they were all just about building these tech companies and then doing nothing else. And now we're seeing this other shift towards different avenues.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that maybe Silicon Valley has woken up to is just that there is a lot of power in Washington, and that previously Silicon Valley felt very far away from Washington. I'd even say with companies first Palantir, but then also Anduril and others, you see a lot more of working with the government, for the government, paid for by the government, among tech firms. And so I think we can certainly anticipate more of that for sure. That will be something I think there are very clear signals that the Pentagon budget is enormous, and I think that that's something that will be very much in the crosshairs for a lot of tech firms, tech investors, and tech entrepreneurs. Beyond that, I do see a number of people who are trying to, maybe it's out of a true sense of public service and trying to make a real difference. Maybe it's out of more selfish motivations. Maybe it's a mix of both, because we're all human and we have all sorts of motivations that drive us, who are very clearly getting involved in DC in a way that they had not before.
Yeah,
that's definitely right. I think one of the questions that I ask is government, are government institutions, and is our government the same as Twitter, now X? Is it the same? Can you take the same approaches? Because is it built for the same purpose? And when Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are talking about firing, everybody with an odd social security number who is a civil servant that works in government, I don't think that that's a great business strategy,
right?
But I certainly don't know if that makes me feel great as someone who cares about public service and cares about our government functioning well, right? And so there is a jokiness that is happening about, the Department of Government Efficiency and all of this,
right?
There's a weirdness where, like, the only way of being involved with Doge, as I understand it, is you have to send a DM to the Doge account, and you have to be a premium subscriber to X to be able to do so.
Yeah.
So is that okay with us? I mean, these are questions we should all be asking. But then ultimately, if the goal is to reduce government, I would just say that, all of us have a stake in that, not just a few people, and all of us have a responsibility to pay attention to what happens with that. And for me, the people who are experts, who have true expertise, who have given their careers, their time and talent to building careers that are, in the advancement of our national interest, should not be fired on a whim. I think that I still believe in a meritocracy where people should be able to earn their way up into positions and have those positions not taken away because of some political purpose or because of some either axe to grind or axe to swing, right? And so I think these are the things that we should all be paying attention to, because they've been very clear. That's all in chapter 14 and 15 of the book,
Okay.
of what they're hoping to destroy or hoping to accomplish.
Well, yeah, I mean, and a lot of this things that happen with politics and government is also because of a pendulum swing. So if you get, if it swings too far to the one side, inevitably it's going to go to until you're getting this pendulum. I just want something like a little pendulum swing, just like, back and forth, not too much change. And I don't know if we're ever going to get to that point where, like, getting back from this huge swings in power. I mean, my next question for you was going to be, how much does entrepreneurship change under a second Trump administration? I mean, that's a really vague softball question, I guess, or very vague at least. Do you want to feel like answering that one? Because again, you are a professor of entrepreneurship too.
Yeah, I mean, the question to me is really hard to anticipate, because who knows really what happens once this administration starts.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are a lot of questions around what to take literally and what is jokey, what is very serious, and what's not. And so I'm not going to play that guessing game, because I don't think that's fruitful. What I would say is there are very clear signals from Vance and from a number of other people that, despite the pro tech and pro VC and pro entrepreneurship language, there's also a very anti-big tech sort of approach that many of the people in this administration that have already been named, and many of them who are not needing to be Senate confirmed, but who are going to be influential because they will be in political roles. Mm-hmm. And so they're guaranteed spots. That those people are going to be looking at big tech in a different way than even the Biden administration did. And so, what does that look like for an entrepreneur? Well, to me, I think having very few companies, the ones that are all mentioned in my book, like, they were all startups and they were all entrepreneurial, like, a long time ago. And That's what's documented in the book. They're the corporate conglomerates of these days. Right. They're the ones that have bought up all of the smaller companies. And they're the ones that, in my mind, the more that you have that big tech influence, the less entrepreneurship you're just naturally going to have, because it's hard to compete, right? And so for me, I could imagine a world in which, if some of these companies were restricted in any way, shape, or form, that opens up new avenues for new companies that can outcompete. And that, to me, is exciting. Like, I think that it is exciting to think about new entrepreneurial businesses, especially if we're thinking about ones that, again, one of the topics I address in the book is that would allow people to share in the value of their data, for instance. It's hard to do, but with new innovations in blockchain, maybe it could be really fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think that there's ground to be trod on that, where you think about the next generation and how they view data and how they view even privacy, and giving them more options. I mean, to me, that creates a freer and fair system where you could actually have more volition and more choices, which is pretty exciting.
That does feel like that's the another big hurdle, that if we can tackle that with the giving end users the control over their own data and their own privacy, that could shake up a lot of the different infrastructures that we now have, and maybe work towards something that's better than what we currently have. Because I don't think anybody's happy with what we currently have. But does this also mean that the Silicon Valley ideal or the culture has changed or is about to change? When you talk to your students, are they interested in that Silicon Valley entrepreneurship, innovation culture, or are they just looking to graduate and work for Facebook or Google at some point? Is that still a thing?
Yeah, it is. We've got all kinds, right? Yeah. I have some students that certainly want the perks of working with those larger firms, and also the stability of working with those larger firms. I had one student, a young man named Harry Gesatner, who created a company called FanFix, FANFIX. And he, along with a couple of other students, one at Vanderbilt and another person, created this company in August of 2 years ago. And he sold it to a group called Superordinary for 8 figures. He literally built it in 10 months, sold it for 8 figures. So he did really well for himself. And the basic premise of that business was that people should share more in the value of the content they were creating. And so if I'm going to post, if I'm going to put a video up, then instead of it being something that Instagram is making all the money off of through Instagram Reels, instead I can have a subscription to that, and people are subscribing to my feed, and that's where that value is being created. And again, what's interesting about it is it's an 80-20 model, similar to what Cameo does with those short videos. Mm-hmm. This is what Fanfics did, was they allowed it so that 80% of the value would go back to the content creator and 20% would go to the platform. So those are the types of models from a business model standpoint that I think are allowing people to have more agency and have more freedom to be able to choose how often they create and what they create and all of that. It's certainly flourished. I mean, I saw just a couple months ago that Harry's created over $100 million to put in the pockets of creators through that. And so, he's a very special entrepreneur who's done very well for himself. Yeah. I don't think my students are not at that level, but many of them are thinking those thoughts. And when we think about the next generation of entrepreneurship, I mean, that to me is way more exciting than necessarily just doing the same thing that we've been doing.
Yeah. So I think you do cover AI a little bit in your book, which was really impressive since you got this done in June 2023. So you did tackle a lot of those early issues. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what kind of impact is that going to have on everything? Because I think we can't really get away with an episode without talking about generative AI and this whole boom in the last 2 years.
Good. That's right. Yeah. I've always been fascinated with what the latest and greatest is, and I've always tried to keep my eye on what's coming around the bend. This is one I was fortunate because my board roles. And so I'm on the board of a company called Public Democracy. It's a big data AI company. Mm-hmm. I'm also on the board of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Louisiana. And I chair the cybersecurity committee here. And so I had a particular vantage point, not just through the research I was doing in the book, but just through my professional work. And what I would say is that, the decisions that are being made about AI are ones that we should all have awareness of how those decisions are getting made and who is making them in the way that maybe we didn't with social media. That would be the first thing I would look at is like, hey, if we actually really do care about getting this right, shouldn't this be something that's not just made by a few people who are very clearly intelligent, but are they making decisions with the best interests of all society or our children or some of these other considerations? Yeah. So that would be the first thing I would say. Now, do I think regulating it or, self-regulation or any of that, like, again, I don't actually think I have the best answers for that. I just want to start asking those questions and having more and more people asking those questions. It's the first thing I would say. Yeah. The other thing I would say, though, is that we all need to be using it more. And that's what I do in my classroom. And so right before this discussion, I teach a student venture class where it's a 2-semester class. Students create companies in there throughout the year. And it's the one that Harry came out of. And so Harry's Fanfics came out of that class. Nowadays, I pay for ChatGPT subscriptions for them. And I say, you think that there are 3 members of your team. There's actually a 4th, and it's AI. Yep. And I want you to rely on that as a co-pilot. But just like you wouldn't have one member of your team do all the work for you, it's not the right way to approach it, right? And I train them to do prompt engineering. I train them to create a persona. I build a GPT that is unique to their business that then they're getting smarter throughout the course of the year, and they move faster. Yeah. Right. Of course they move faster, right? But what's that equip them to do? Well, maybe it helps them build a great business and be able to go to market with it sooner. But even if not, they're trained for the professional world in a way in which even if they go work at a large corporation, not even a tech company, they will know more because many of their bosses just bluntly are still using this thing like it's Google. They're still using it like a search tool. They type a question into the box and expect the right answer to come back and then use that. That is not what this tool is. We know that. It's a chat tool. You have to make it very smart in how it's chatting and how you're preparing the tool to be able to give you the right answers over time, right? And so that for me is something that I'm definitely trying to incorporate in all the ways that I teach, because I think it is that transformative, and I see how powerful it is. Well,
it's really interesting that you say that, because again, this is episode 205 of our show, and early on in this new version of Today in Tech, was right when ChatGPT came out. And I think we did an episode talking to another professor out in California. And there was all this discussion about, ChatGPT and generative AI is the worst thing that could happen. And, schools were banning it and professors were like, we don't want anybody to use it. So within the course of the 2 years, we're now seeing more and more, I think, people using it like you are using it. We did have some people saying like, oh, you should be using this as a co-pilot and not take it word for word. But it's refreshing to hear that a lot of people are still using it in the way you're using it versus the other way.
Yeah, I mean, if any of the professors listen to this, I would say I've been using it from day one that is available publicly. And you have to learn how to change your teaching, but that's really important for you to be a good educator. Right. That's my point. It's like, it's easier for me to try and ban it and run away from it as a professor, to stick with the syllabus I've always had and make the students go to the library and use Statista to look at market analyses. That's easier for me.
Right.
But it's not preparing the students for the world they'll live in.
Right.
And so, we used to think that the Google was devil, the devil was Google. And we're like, why would you use that Google machine to get the answers if you could look it up in books? Like, clearly we were wrong if that was the approach we were taking.
Well, original Google, not Google now.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the original Google, right? That was at least giving us that. I mean, but what I would say is like, or I should have said Alta Vista or Ask Jeeves or one of those.
Oh man, I miss Ask Jeeves. He was the best.
He was the best.
Yeah.
So I would just say, like, use the tools in ways that you can make sure that the students are making the most of them. But it's not a shortcut. It's actually it enhances the learning. And in the same way that, like, I had a TI-82 calculator, right? When I was coming up, like, did that make me worse at math? No, because I then still had to take calculus. I still had to know how to do it.
Yeah.
And then I used the tool. And then when that calculator became Excel, right? And that Excel then became me knowing how to use VLOOKUPs and pivot tables and everything else, like, guess what? I got better, right? And so that's the same thing for me as someone who's trying to teach our kids how to be really great with these tools, is you meet them where they are, you learn the tools, and you train them in the ways that are context appropriate.
All right. So I do think that artificial intelligence technology itself will continue, get better. Companies will use it in really cool ways. But I want to jump back to, are we doomed to repeat the history of maybe what happened with the internet bubble with a lot of these AI companies? It feels like I've read a lot of articles about that, there's another bubble coming, and a lot of the promises that are being made by a lot of these big companies may never come to fruition. And we're just being sold a bag of goods and, not this lofty goals. And we're seeing it in even within the AI world, it's repeating itself, because, generative AI was the best thing since sliced bread. And now we're hearing from all of these companies about AI agents, and the agents are going to be the best thing since sliced bread. And they're all going to solve our problems. We just keep giving them money. And the VCs out there keep giving them money. So do you think that, based on the lessons that you learned while writing this book, are we basically headed down that same path, or can we actually maybe prevent a hard landing or a bubble burst at this point?
So what's your P-Doom score? I guess that's the question.
It's my what?
Your P-Doom score, your probability of doom.
Oh, I go back and forth on this. I think, for a while, I see the world of corporate finance. At some point, with all this money being thrown, someone's going to say at some point, hey, where's the ROI on this stuff? And if you can't prove that you're spending this money well, they're gonna turn off the faucet. And then I also see a lot of P.T. Barnum in some of these AI wizards as well. So I think that could end up crashing as well. But
neither of those actually ends humanity.
No, it doesn't. No, I'm not saying it ends humanity. That argument, I gave up on that one a long time ago, because I also don't think we're ever going to achieve artificial general intelligence. I've used these tools enough to know. When I start to get into an argument with my AI chatbot, then I know that they haven't solved it yet. When I try to get them to draw a picture and they screw it up, and then I circle it and say, fix this part, and it still can't do it. Like, the Terminator's not coming at this point.
Again, I don't have those answers either. What I would say is understanding how we got here and how decisions were made.
Yeah.
And how few people understood, for instance, the value of data. How few people understood what real true surveillance was all about, as your geolocation was turned on and these companies learn more about you than you know about yourself, right? Like the true value of me telling Google more than I would tell my best friend or my spouse or whomever else, right? Like the true value of that data. A friend of mine says that Google is like the greatest confessional because you'll say things there that you wouldn't say in prayer or to your priest, right? The true value of that, right, is extremely valuable, and it's created multi-trillion-dollar companies. And so, I would say at least trying to understand it, even from a business standpoint, I think is really important. And so if AI, as it continues to grow, can validate that value creation and can, in my hope, reward not just very, very, very few people, but actually create greater societal benefit that also is economic, not just convenient, then I think we're having the right conversation.
But okay, I also think of that phrase where if like this is a thing either picked up on a meme or Reddit or something where it's like if you're the hero and you live long enough, you become the villain. And I think I screwed up the quote, but that basically eventually all heroes will become villains at some point. That's very cynical from my perspective. But what are your thoughts on that? Is that where a lot of these AI companies will end up? Like, again, there's some really great tools and some great things that came out, but eventually AI will not destroy us from a Terminator standpoint, but may lead us down even darker paths of privacy and all sorts of bad things.
Yeah, I mean, on the most obvious one about the .com boom and bust, and then the sort of follow on to that, where every e-commerce became commerce, right? Like, I think that's an interesting precedent. But I mean, the clear question for me is that we have not had a recession. We have not had a recession since the Great Recession, right? Mm-hmm. Since the housing bust in 08, 09, even COVID, like, the federal government softened our way out of overall, right? Like it was hard for a bit, but like then we were kind of fine, right? And so you look at where the public stock market is and how much of it is driven by the Magnificent Seven right now, right? The high tech players. I mean, let's just be clear. My students in my classroom who are 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, in their like sentient, cognizant lifetime that never experienced a downturn.
Right.
They experienced COVID, but economically, they can't literally remember the Great Recession, right? And some of them weren't even born almost.
Right.
Like, that's a long period of time if you believe that markets are cyclical.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to predict that it's going to happen or when it's going to happen or why. I am going to say like, there's something very unusual going on here that has been going on for the last couple of decades, roughly. And that is something that we should all pay attention to, especially if we're trying to think through, like, I don't think the world's a less risky place, right? I mean, I live in New Orleans where, like, we have huge storms that come our way that are getting worse. Like, that is not a less risky place, right?
Right.
Home insurance is higher as a result of that being priced in. That is not less risky.
Right.
And you could look at any other issue. I just looked at one just now, but you could look at any other issue. I think that's something that's just at least, whether it's AI or whether it's, any other number of problems, our mounting debt, our healthcare costs, all of these things, like they're all, I don't think we're living in a less risky place. Global war, all these other issues. Like, yeah. So at least trying to understand that AI is not going to either be the savior or the villain.
Okay.
It is a very powerful tool, and how that tool gets used by whom and towards what purposes is ultimately the story of the book. And it is the reason why I wanted to write that book, not just for AI, but for any of the opportunities and challenges we face. Because I think understanding it and being smart about it is going to help us all.
All right, leave us on a good note, because now you were starting to get me sad and depressed there for a second, Rob. Again, the ultimate answer that you've been talking about is that we're all human. So I think maybe our use of AI in the future will all depend on how humans use it, whether they use it for good or for bad purposes. So that seems to be the takeaway that I got from the book as well.
That's right. And in the epilogue, I go back and interview these folks that probably would never be remembered. I call them ordinary people, and I put it in quotes in a way of not denigrating them, but actually lifting them up and lifting up that term. Is just like they'd never be known by history unless they ended up in a book like this. And by interviewing them, saying, "Holy cow, you said this in 05 or 06, and it was really smart. What do you think now? And how have you lived your life?" Like, no, they are not centibillionaires like Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
They're not. But that's not how they measure their life's worth.
Right.
They're great parents, and they are good members of their community, and they volunteer for their kids. Same thing I was doing last night and my kid's baseball game. Right? Like that's what they're spending their time doing. And I think that what's interesting is if we start to think about how does technology serve those people in ways that helps them actually live the lives that they want. Maybe it is sharing your pictures from Thanksgiving, right? Maybe. But maybe there's a higher purpose and a greater way that we could build new technologies that would serve that end, that actually meets us where our humanity is and actually helps us to be not less human, like the idea of sort of living in the metaverse we were debating earlier, but actually more human.
I'm going to bring you back for another metaverse discussion at some point. But thanks for ending that on a more positive note. So, Rob, thanks for being on the show. It was a great discussion. Thank you.
I loved it. Great to hang out. Thank you.
All right, that's all the time we have for today's show. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Please add any thoughts you have below. We love reading the thoughts. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.